Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. And we are back here with Dr. Robert B. Shaw. He's a licensed clinical mental health counselor. He's an author of over 6 books, right? Correct? He's a speaker and so much more. Welcome back to the show today. How are you?
I'm fine, Jill. Thank you very much for having me be with you today.
Well, thank you. Would you mind introducing yourself to our viewers and listeners today? Thank you.
My name is Dr. Robert Shaw. I'm originally from the New York, New Jersey area. I currently live in North Carolina. I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor. I am also a pastor. I'm a university professor and an author of 6 books.
Wow. And I've spoken to him in the past, and I know he just loves sharing his knowledge. He's a sweet human being, which is so important. And with the wealth of knowledge he's experienced over his course of his years here, he's just loves helping other people and sharing it, which is pretty amazing. I was flawed by that when we spoke last time. That was very kind of you to say. You're just doing what you think is right and just want to pass along what you know.
Well, I've learned a lot over the years, not just in my own degree work, but I find that I get inspired by my clients. I have learned at a young age the importance of coming alongside of people. Let me share a story about that.
Sure.
When I was 17 years old, I lost my mother to cancer. I was a senior in high school, and she died 2 weeks before Christmas.
Oh, so sorry.
And she was only 49 years old. I have a younger brother who was 13 at the time. I was 17. At the time of her death, and I can go into detail, but just suffice it to say for now, I had an experience that God became very real to me in a very, very difficult time. And during the course of my mom's wake, and in those days, this was back in the early 70s, during those days, it was kind of traditional to have a visitation for like 2 days and then a funeral service and so on. During that time, I had what I could call a solemn peace that I could not explain. It was just like his presence was with me. I felt his hand on my shoulder, literally, in a very spiritual way. But what really got my attention was during the course of the visitation, I had 41 of my high school friends and teammates. I was an athlete and went on to college with an athletic scholarship. But 41 of my high school friends and teammates came to my mom's visitation. Now, most of them did not know her. They knew me.
Yep.
And fast forward maybe about 10 months later, when I started college, I started sharing with some friends that I had just started meeting at the time of what took place in my life. And a good friend of mine, a teammate at the college level, started sharing with me about the love of Jesus, the love of Christ. And he said, it's like when God becomes real to you. I said, yes, tell me more. And it says, it's like, his spirit comes alongside of you. I said, tell me more. Because I was ripe, because that's exactly what I experienced.
Yeah.
And from those days, I began to really desire to be a person to come alongside of others, because I knew what that meant to me.
Yeah.
When someone who did not even have any idea what they were doing or the impact they were making by just coming to visit with me during the time of my mom's wake and visitations, that I wanted to be the type of person that comes alongside of others to help them through difficult times or stressful times or whatever the case may be.
Well, I commend you on sharing that experience. And I know it wasn't easy. And I only lost my mom 5 years ago to cancer. She was 62. And I have a very specific memory of the same type of concept. I had friends from work that lived over 2.5 hours away. And when I walked out of the church that day, because, we did the visitation for the 2 days and then we had the church, they were there waving goodbye to us. And I had no idea they came. It was, I know some came to the wake, but they actually came to the service. And I said, wow. I have goosebumps right now as you're speaking about it because the impact of how that makes you feel, how
Yes.
someone was there, not even, I'm going to cry, realizing how it means so much and it meant so much. And I, my son is in first grade now. He just started religious services a few months ago, and I'm
Uh-huh.
Catholic, but I'm not super religious. And I just started going to church with him a few months
Yeah.
ago. And
Yeah.
I'm learning and I'm loving, but it wasn't until my mom passed away about 5 years ago where I really started believing in God and Jesus. I mean, not that I didn't believe, I didn't really understand. I didn't take the time to pray as much. I didn't. And
Sure.
so
Sure. I
I just
understand
want
that.
to let you know that I can empathize with you. And sorry for the tears, but thank you for
That's okay.
sharing. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and in the scriptures, there's a story about Job, and most people know about this, the story of Job and how he had a terrible, terrible situation. He lost his children. He had 10 children. He lost his wealth. He lost his health, all within moments. And then he had these so-called friends come alongside of him, and they kind of came alongside of him, criticizing him and blaming him for things that go on. And that happens so often in our culture today. When something goes wrong in a person's life, oftentimes they get blamed for it. And that's not always the case.
Yeah.
Yes, we do have consequences to our decisions, and those do arise, but that's not always the case.
Yeah.
Well, in Job's friend's case, they were blasting him for it,
Uh,
and then he started to defend himself, and it was really kind of ugly, basically, in that story. But at the end of the story, God shows up and begins to become real to Job and starts speaking to him. And this was Job's confession. At the very end of the book, he says, I've heard about you, but now I see you.
yeah.
And again, that's what struck my life was, I grew up in the church also, as well. But for the first time after going through, catechism and
Huh?
confirmation and all that good stuff, I took it seriously, but I just knew about God.
Yeah.
But during that time, in a very difficult time in my life, I got to see him
I know
and
him.
feel him. And ever
Mhm.
since then, that's the type of coming alongside of a person that I want to be.
Beautiful. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing your experience. So let me ask. So unfortunately, you lost your mom. You were 17, you said.
Yes.
Did you have a path that you were going on with school and college to become a professor, or did you always want to go into mental health counseling? And could you kind of give us a little bit of your path and journey?
That's a good question. No, I didn't quite have, that was at that point in time that I, again, wanted to be the type of person to come alongside of someone, but I didn't know what that looked like
Yeah.
vocationally or professionally. Um, I felt called into ministry because that to me was one, but at the same time, the pastor of my church really was one of those people, besides those friends from high school, who indeed took a shine to me, pulled me aside, and began to give me opportunities to take leadership roles, began to give me opportunities just to kind of spread my wings a little bit. And he was very affirming. So he was one of the first ones that got my attention that this is the type of vocation. This is what I want to be. I want to be a pastor. Then as time went on,
Yeah.
I realized, ministry is more than just standing in the pulpit and preaching, which I've done. It took me several years, actually, almost about a decade and a half, to be honest, to really hone in on what was my passion. And what I want to encourage, one of the books I wrote is called Created for Purpose. And the 6 books I wrote, I've written on what I call human core longings. Every single human being, no matter what gender and no matter what culture we're from, has these core longings that have been created in us. One of them is, I want to know what I'm here for.
Yeah.
I want to know what my purpose is. We long to
Oh.
discover that.
Mhm.
So I wrote this book called Created for Purpose. And it took me a long time to kind of, and one of the ways to determine your purpose or to begin to see it emerge is to understand what your passions are. What is your passion? Do you love to draw? Do you love to help people? Do you love to put things together and take them apart and then put them back together again? All those little things that you see yourself doing that you love can indicate there's something to that. Like
Yeah.
the last one, taking things apart, putting it back together again, and taking it. That may be an electrical engineer.
Yeah.
It could be a mechanical engineer.
Yeah.
Helping people, that covers a lot of ground. You could be a pastor, a teacher, a counselor, social worker, um, doctor, nurse. I mean, those that helping other people can fall into a lot of different buckets.
Yeah.
For me, because of my experience, the bucket was to help and come alongside of folks to walk them through the shadow of the valley of death to get them
Yeah.
to a place from A to B in a better situation.
Beautifully said. Wow. And when did you write the first book?
The first one I wrote is called Created for Significance, which is
Okay.
understanding who we are. How do we discover our identity? How do we know who we are? And we all have a significance if we know how to find it. So I wrote that particular book back, I believe it was 2012. The next book is called Created for Covering. That's the biblical term for safety. We all have a desire to just be safe, to know that we are safe in our environment. I mean, you go to the workplace, and OSHA has these posters that are posted that are indicating how safe you have to be in your environment.
Yeah.
Workplace violence, zero tolerance, all of that stuff indicates. And if you buy a car, safety features are a lot of times expressed because those are the things that get our attention.
Yep.
But the most important environment of safety that we all long for is to be safe in our relationships. So it's called Created for Covering because, again, covering is the biblical term for being safe. Number 3 was Created for Purpose, which I touched on. Number 4 is Created for Understanding. We all have a longing to be understood. I wish they could just hear my heart. I wish somebody can just get me or give me a chance to speak so that it can be understood. We all have that desire
That
deeply.
yearning. Yep.
Book number 5 is Created for Belonging. We all have a sense to belong to something or someone, and oftentimes something or someone bigger than ourselves. Not just God, but that's the ultimate, of course, but maybe to a higher purpose of I want to belong to something that makes a difference in people's lives. I want to belong to an organization that really I can believe in what they produce or what they serve in doing. I want to belong to a significant other. None of us are made to be an island. Paul Simon wrote, "I am a rock," back in the 60s. And unfortunately, that's the opposite of what our longings are. We don't want to be an island all by ourselves. We hate that deep inside. We want to belong to something or someone. And then the last one is the most, not so much profound, but it ties it all together, and that is Created for Love. What I have found in working with people is what's common is that if we don't grow up receiving the love that we need as well as desire, there's a lot of dysfunctions that take place.
Nope.
But it's a two-way street. Love is always a two-way street. It could be just as devastating that if we try to express love to someone and it gets rejected. So love has to be received, but we also have to have the ability to express it and have it be received. Both ways can be very devastating to an individual.
Got it. And at this time of the show, I would just love for you to remind everyone your website, how we can contact you. We're going to take a quick commercial break.
Yes, my website is www.rbshaw.net. And on that website, you can learn a little bit more about me as well as ordering my books.
Perfect. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with more after the break.
Hello, my name is Dr. Robert Shaw. I'm a clinical mental health counselor, pastor, university professor, and an author of 6 books dealing with human core longings and how to meet those in healthy ways. If you are struggling with mental health issues, or your organization, or your church, or your group is looking to better integrate meaningful relationships, contact me at rbshaw.net, rbshaw.net, and I will be glad to come and provide a conference, seminar, and speaking engagement to bring people together to integrate spirituality, relationship building skills, and psychological truths that allow people to have meaningful understandings and meaningful relationships. Thank you.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
And we're back here with Dr. Robert Shaw, as you may have just heard. He's a licensed mental, health counselor. Also, he's a speaker. He's an author. And so much more. And you just heard here his commercial, and you've done so much in your life. And to someone like me, is like, wow, this man does it all. He's here counseling, Christian counseling. He's a man of God. He's also, he's an author. You do so much, but you're so modest and you're so humble, which is such a beautiful thing as well. And you're here on a mission to help people. And clearly that's what you're doing. And I'm glad to have you back here on the show today. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jill. It's very kind of you to say.
Right. So we were addressing, you have 6 books. We were just talking about the first few. Would you like to continue mentioning the books?
I touched on them again. Creative for Significance, Creative for Covering, Creative for Purpose, Creative for Understanding, Creative for Belonging, and Creative for Love. All 6 of those core longings I have learned by working with people as well as in my own graduate studies to be what every single human being has been created or ingrained to have, that we long for. We want to know who we are, which is our identity, our significance. We long to be safe in our environments, but particularly in relationships. We want to be able to know what, not who we are, but what we're here for, our purpose. We want to know if people can understand, if we can connect. We have a longing to connect. One thing about today's day and age with that particular subject, we are the most connected world that has ever existed, mainly because of media, cell phones, emails, Instagram. I mean, I don't even know what's out there, honestly. But we are also the most misunderstood group that has ever existed. The reason being, and I may have touched on this in our first time together, Jill, and that is communication. There are 3 components to communication. There is content, tone of voice, and nonverbal, body language type stuff. Content is 7% of communication. So if we are texting people, emailing people, using media, all we are conveying is 7% of what we want to say, because it's content. We're just sending content. Now, of course, if you put it all in capital letters, it may feel like you're getting yelled at.
Shouting or but it's always misconstrued, right? Like you mentioned yesterday, that pat on the back, that gentle, hey, good job. Yes. There's so much to be said for that human touch and emotion that goes beyond that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So when you have that content, which is only 7%, if you have a tone of voice added to what you're conveying, that's 38% of communication. So you may want to say something and have a particular subject that you're conveying, but if your tone of voice is not consistent with what it is you're trying to say, content gets really skewed. And then the last one, if you do the math, 55% of communication is nonverbal. So if I'm sitting with someone in my office and they're talking to me about something that's really meaningful to them and that they're really hurting about, and I'm sitting back in my chair and I fold my arms like this.
Yeah.
Nonverbal communication would indicate that
you're not really interested. You're not interested.
Exactly. And I didn't say a word.
Wow, you're right. Yeah.
But they pick it up. Or if I'm looking at my watch, waiting for the hour to go by or something, that's telling them I'm looking to get the heck out of this thing because I don't want to be here. So, and I didn't say a word.
Yeah.
So in our high-tech, low-touch society.
Low touch, I like that. I'm going to use that.
We are getting only 7% of communication. I spent time with a couple who married for about 8 years, young couple, no children yet, both are working outside the home. And they came to counseling because they had trouble communicating with each other. They were always in conflict. At least that's what they reported. Their day was like they would send maybe 8 to 10 text messages per day to each other. They would get home from work and they would argue about what they said to each other via text. So, did you really mean to say blah, blah, blah when you said that? No, of course not. See, all they were expressing was content.
Yeah.
They didn't get the idea of their emotion behind it because there was no tone of voice. You can't express that. Body language was way out the window. So if they had said something to them like, I was thinking of you today and I love you. And they get home, they argue about, what do you mean you were thinking of me today? What did I do? That's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. I was just thinking, so now if you were in person with someone and you actually walk up and you're face to face with them and you say, I was thinking about you today. That physical touch right there says more than what your content says.
True.
And without that, we are lacking the real communication that means that we get connected.
Beautifully said. Yeah, that resonates
So that's
with
understanding.
me for
Creative for
sure.
understanding, creative for belonging, again, is just knowing that we all long to belong to someone or something, and usually something bigger than ourselves that make us feel that much more affirmed. And then creative for love. Those are the 6 books.
Beautiful. And you're here to help so many different people. I mean, during the break, I was going over your website again. I looked at it yesterday, but the amount of work you do and the people you're helping, it's pretty amazing. Could you share some experiences to the types of people that you're working with? You don't have to give names, but like you mentioned, relationships. Sure. What other things do people need guidance with that they come to you for?
A vast group, way beyond even my own dreams, Jill. I have had the honor, and I continue to have the honor of working with our military.
Yep.
since 2009. For several years, I was right outside of Fort Bragg in North Carolina, working with military during the multiple deployments that they had to experience at the time. I'm still a military one-source provider, and it's an honor for me to serve those who serve us. To me, working with our military when they have difficult times is an honor for me. I work with couples and relationships. I work with individuals who struggle primarily with depression, anxiety, and traumatic events. And to be very honest with you, every one of us has had trauma in our lives. Yeah. Trauma that can vary from death of a loved one, as we talked about earlier, being in a car accident, when you could be 6 years old and lose your favorite pet. That's traumatic for a 6-year-old. Losing your job, which could be not just your way of providing for your family, it could be the ultimate dream that you've had of being in that particular job. You found your passion, you found what your purpose was, and all of a sudden it goes up in smoke. So that's traumatic. More than just losing your wherewithal, it could be losing your dream at the same time. Someone who gets sexually assaulted or raped, they lose a lot of things that we don't really consider. Not only do they lose, let's say, their virginity, they may lose the feeling of innocence. They may lose the feeling of safety, which is a longing we all have, right? We may lose, a person who experiences that may lose a sense of well-being. They may lose a little bit of health if they have been sexually assaulted to the degree that more than just a sex took place. If they got beat up, for example, they lose a lot of things that are conceptual, not just what looks to be, flesh and blood. And those types of losses absolutely need someone to come alongside of. What was very interesting for me and very humbling for me is when I first started working with people as a pastor, then also as a licensed counselor, the first set of individuals that came, I'd say for the first couple of years, were women who were sexually assaulted or raped. And I remember saying to myself and praying and asking God, I said, Lord, I'm not so sure I signed up for this. I'm seeing all this stuff that I wasn't really prepared for. What do you want me? How do I do this? And he said, hang in there, son, because your gender alone will be part of the healing process.
Learning to trust someone.
And I took that so seriously that I have to develop a safe environment when it's a woman and a man counselor, so that they can, like you said, gain some trust back. And can I speak to them after all they may have been perpetrated by another male, and by guilt of association I may not be effective. I have to change all of that, but I have to do that very, very strategically and compassionately.
And clearly you have, and you are making a difference in so many people's lives.
Well, it's a privilege and an honor for me to do that. And the opportunities when they open up for me, I'm always amazed by them. So.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing. We're just about out of time. So just to sum up today's show, what else do you want to add to our listeners before we have to go?
Every one of you who are listening today have all of these desires, these internal longings, and they need to be met. Ultimately, they can be met since they've been created in us. Ultimately, they can be met by a relationship and an understanding of God. But they can also be met by meaningful relationships in your life. It is so important to make sure you choose good, healthy relationships, because those longings can be hurt or they could be met.
Beautifully said. Dr. Robert Shaw, tell us the website and how we can reach you, please.
Yes, the website is again www.rbshaw.net. And on the website is both my email and my phone number and a list of my books.
Perfect. Thank you for being here today. It's a pleasure to get to see you. There's something to be said for making eye contact, even though we're far. You're in North Carolina, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. I'm over in New York. But where, by the way, were you from in New York?
I went to school in Wagner College in Staten Island, New York, and I grew up in Jersey City.
Awesome. I'm a Long Islander, but from the area. So good to know. And my brother just moved down to North Carolina 2 years ago. I still have never been to your state, but I hear beautiful things about it. So I'll be visiting one of these days.
There's a lot of ex-Yankees down there.
Yes. Thank you so much for your time today. And thank you to all of our listeners and viewers. Please stay tuned. More of the show is on the way.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.